yoga, and also Jnana Yoga as well, and elaborated, systematized into its own tradition, but also drew on Tantra. And so that is what is so appealing. It's not a don't-touchism religion. It is an organic religion that has synthesized, it's enveloped. Out of the Muslim invasion comes Sufism, which our lineage has embraced and realized Allah, and we have monks in our order who are Muslim. Look at Ramakrishna as Allah. That is thrilling to me. Where I would come into a religious tradition and wonder, why, if all religions are true, as Sri Ramakrishna says, why didn't I feel that spirituality in Christianity? And then I read Swami Prabhupananda's book, the Sermon on the Mount according to Vedanta, and it opened up a whole world. Christ's teachings were no different than Ramakrishna's. And so a whole new world of looking at the world traditions opened up for me, where I could see how these great avatars and seers were having similar experiences through their own religious tradition. So there was a difference between churchianity and Christianity. That is why I left Christianity when I did, because it was theology.
You really feel, sincerely speaking, you really feel you did find in Sanatana Dharma what you were seeking?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been at this for almost 50 years. I would have been long gone.
Okay. As an extension of this question, you think today we are passing through the age of science.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to question recklessly anything. Any belief, they are prepared to shatter to pieces if they cannot stand the test of investigation.
Yes.
In this context, in this background, you think Sanatana Dharma can withstand this onslaught of questioning and still show its might? Do you think it is?
Oh, not only absolutely, but superiorly. Buddhism and Vedanta, both. And my nephew is an atheist. And he's also a top theoretical physicist. He's worked on the accelerator in Switzerland, and he works on dark matter. He and his wife are a team, and they've been published. And when I happened to be lecturing in our Providence Center, he came from Harvard and MIT graduate. He came, met me there, and met also two of our monks. And we gave him a book on Vedanta, Vivekananda. And he said, you know, Auntie, we have to read logic and analysis. And we also have to read and study the Eastern traditions, along with other traditions of the world. And Buddhism and Vedanta come the closest to science. But because he is atheist, I felt he would be more drawn to the Buddhist tradition. And I gave him books on Buddhism, written by Alan Wallace, who is a physicist and a Buddhist monk. He was a Buddhist monk for 12 years, and now he's a Buddhist teacher. He's married. But he has started consciousness studies in Santa Barbara. And he works with the Dalai Lama and with Richie Davidson and University of Wisconsin. My mother, who was initiated, she said, how could you do that? Why didn't you give him books on Vedanta? She's a born-again Vedantist. I said, Mother, you have to give the food that they need. And Vedanta is not just about a sect, it's about spirituality and spirituality alone. And that is one of the definitions of Vedanta. So she accepted that.
You made a mention about Vivekananda written by Shankaracharya. It's more than 100,000 years. It's more than 1,000 years after Shankara appeared and went off from the, at least the physical visibility.
Right.
There are so many critics of late in India that they say Shankara was responsible for Buddhism to take to its heels. He drove Buddhism out and all that. That apart, you think Shankara's contribution to religion of India has anything to do with the modern day generation?
To the modern day.
Modern day generation?
I don't think what Shankara did was a negative thing. In those days, instead of slaughtering the monks and taking the monastery, you engaged in debate with him, and if you won the monastery. I don't think that...
Did he give any scientific religion? Did he give any scientific religion?
He did. His rigorous analysis. This is what my nephew is drawn to. This analysis, this subtle argumentation to arrive at the truth. A good physicist has to use those tools. For example, when I meet with atheists, I had to speak on, in this age of technology, do we need God? Okay. All we have to do, Vivekananda, is believe in ourselves. Now, what does that mean? We have to know that the only direct experience that we can possibly have is I am. I exist. And then I know that I am. So that pure existence is Satchidananda. There's no denying what we have direct knowledge of. It's the most true and to the point religious tradition in the world, I would say. I am more drawn to Vedanta. At first I was drawn to Buddhism, and I've had some very in-depth exchanges with Buddhist monks. One, the head of the Theravada Buddhist tradition, Venerable Ananda Maitreya, who was very revered by our Swamis. He had headquarters in Sri Lanka, London, and Los Angeles. And we invited him to Santa Barbara for the birth anniversary or the passing of Sri Ramakrishna, 100-year passing. And he had studied yoga. He was an adept in Vedanta as well. And of course, he was a Bodhisattva. Though he was a Theravadan, he was a Bodhisattva. He was a realized soul. Yeah, he was a realized soul. He died at 106 years old. But he could talk to me across any religious lines. And when I actually went to a Buddhist monastery to practice before I joined the convent. And I decided to give it up because it was too boring. I love the fact that we can draw on every aspect of our psychophysical being to pull it in and focus it to realize God. Bhakti yoga, our emotions. Raja yoga, our contemplative nature. Jnana yoga, our analytical ability. And karma yoga, our active nature. So it's not a one-sided deal. We can use every aspect. And that there is no one rule of thumb for everyone. It's another attractive point.
What has Shankaracharya to do with this?
Shankaracharya, he did not... Shankaracharya is going to appeal to the young techies coming out of India. Right now we have a young Swami in this country who is a Vedanta scholar who he has thousands of followers on YouTube. He was the Acharya at Villamat, and he was posted to the Vedanta Society of Southern California, and now he's the president in the New York Center. And we see from the attraction of our Eastern and Western that for this country, Vivekananda was right. He said, go to every door and preach a door to Vedanta. When we see the young techies coming to our center and we see how attracted they are to the Swami's words, giving top Vedanta from the tradition Viveka, from the Aparodhyabuddhi, from the Panchadasi, which even Sri Ramakrishna said it's just too heavy to, and how he brings the juice and excites these people to the point where they feel they actually own the logic behind it. He has a Shankara is only, we're getting another wave of Shankara right now in America. Yeah?
So nice to hear it.
Oh, and you know, Westerners are really drawn to the Advaita Vedanta. Without that, they would not be coming to our Hindu center. It's because of the non-dualistic that they're drawn. Without that, and without that, I wouldn't be drawn. When I go to worship, my teacher said it's a non-dualistic worship. We, in Santa Barbara, we did 2 worships every day. We picked a total of 300 flowers a day in our big temple and in our little shrine. So worship was a large part of our sadhana. And Swami explained to us, you worship everything as Brahman. Then you invoke the presence within yourself, you lift the Kundalini power and meditate, dissolve the universe and meditate in the Sahasrara and your oneness with Brahman. You bring that force down into the heart and worship mentally the chosen ideal as an aspect, a symbol of Brahman, and you invoke that presence in the image before you. And then with flowers, perfume, incense, light, food, water, you take Brahman, through Brahman, to Brahman. Non-dualistic. That appeals to me.
So non-dualism even now has got tremendous appeal for the whole world.
True. Very much.
For all people.
Westerners, absolutely. And also the Mother Goddess. The Mother Goddess has a tremendous resurgence in the West. When I went to India in 1997 to speak at a Vedanta conference at the Institute of Culture, the Swamis had asked me to pick a topic, Vedanta concept, and I chose Sarvadeva. And I sent a survey out to Vedantas in America. And from that survey, statistics came forward about how she is an emblem of strength. She has redefined the spiritual arena of the household. And she herself was a reformer, an unconscious reformer. Because of her universality, she crossed caste boundaries, brought Nivedita into her household, ate with her. She was an advocate against domestic violence, stopping an act of domestic violence. She was an advocate for animal rights, refused that the cat that took refuge at her feet be beaten by the mouse. I mean, in her life, she was worshipped as the goddess. And where else do you find that? And so with the Sardhamat in India, we find for the first time in the history of the world religions, a women's organization, religious organization, self-governed by women. Women from other traditions ask me, do you do the worship? Are you allowed? Of course. Are you allowed to speak and lecture? Yes, of course. Catholic Church, no. They can't perform the ritual worship. They're behind bars. Yes. They don't go out in the same way that the Vedanta nuns do. They're a force. And it's a new paradigm of women monasticism.
Beautiful. Yes. What do you feel about the present day scenario of womenhood in India?
Oh, in India and America. Well, It's interesting because of the Asian immigration coming. India is coming to America, and then because many of the jobs are just temporary jobs, they go back to India. And so ideas are being spread. One of the very interesting things to me was 30 years ago, how Asian women were setting up their own battered women shelters and hotlines. Now that in Canada and the United States. So wherever I go, I have the hotline telephone numbers for battered women, domestic violence, Asian or non-Asian, psychiatrists, and good Alcoholic Anonymous groups. So resources for people who are in trouble, mental health-wise or domestic violence, sociologically, psychologically, whatever. And I have reverted many Asian women to the Chekna, which is the Asian women version for domestic violence, the hotline. So in that sense, Indian women, by their contact with the West, are becoming empowered to understand that certain culturally accepted things that cause them shame are no longer acceptable. They see a new paradigm of family life here that, when our Swamis first came, I remember some of them, after Swami Prabhavananda, some of them I heard saying, so in India the women are battered, but they stay together, the family stays together. And how shocked I was to hear that. Until they began receiving interviews from women who were battered. And then they began to hear from the nuns in this country what's unacceptable. We spoke out and said, no, not only does this affect their mental health, it's illegal. It causes trauma, irreversible psychological problems. It must be stopped. And women must undergo psychological counseling so they don't go back to the person who beat them. Because love and brutality have become mixed up and confused in their mind. The other thing that I think is going to have an impact on India is a greater understanding of addiction. When Swami came to Dallas, and in the course of conversation, he talked about a drunkard. And I said, Swami, that's not a word, that's a very disparaging word, and it's a word that is considered backward now. They're alcoholics. And alcoholism is considered a disease, and it's treatable, through a very successful organization called the 12 Steps, Alcoholics Anonymous. Mm-hmm. And I came out of my room and brought the book, and I said, this was given to me by a very prominent member of our congregation. And you yourself would be surprised to find out how many AAers attend your congregation. Many people in America are recovering alcoholics. And so there is no stigma attached to this organization. It's secret. You're not supposed to divulge what goes on in a 12-step program. But it is so successful, and it's such a spiritual program, that these folks start in the 12-step and then they come to Vedanta. And not only is it a 12-step program for alcoholics, but for drug addiction, that starts not from any wrongdoing on the part of the drug user necessarily, but through some childhood trauma. Sexual abuse, emotional abuse, childhood abuse, where the drug is used to numb the pain. And so these 12-step programs are about telling your truth, holding on to a higher power, asking forgiveness, and deepening and taking inventory of your life. How many Vedantists can do that? Very few. And what you find in these 12-step programs, and I've been intimately involved with sponsors and sponsees and who've shared their experience, is there is a lot of truth-telling. They're not allowed to lie. because their sponsors are recovering alcoholics themselves, and they know how the mind deceives. And interestingly enough, it was in our Trabuco monastery where the Oxford movement leaders developed the last steps of the 12-step program. So it was in our monastery in the Vedanta Society of Southern California, before it became a monastery, that the Oxford leaders of that Oxford movement formulated the last steps. And in some of our centers, we allow if we have a member in our congregation who is a recovering alcoholic, to hold the meetings in a room in our center. Yes, and in Santa Barbara, we allowed many alcoholics to do the step of forgiveness on the steps of our temple.
As I move through different families spread across different cities in the United States, I find it as a common complaint coming from the mothers in the house that once their daughters come of age, they develop a scant regards for Indian traditional values.
Yeah.
They don't care at all
Yeah.
to bring it into practice.
That's a very real trend.
And they seek a solution from my side. Every time they seek a solution from my side, I recall to my memory what Vivekananda has said. The women must solve their problems by themselves. So this being a problem with the women, and you also being women.
It's also a problem with the men as well, but I think I know why the children are turning against the tradition, the Hindu tradition. Because their parents cannot explain the meaning behind the rituals. And it embarrasses the children when they're with their Western friends that they don't understand their own religion. That's why Vedanta is the spokesperson for Hinduism in interfaith dialogues. Because Vivekananda tells us the meaning behind the ritual. He tells us the meaning behind karma yoga. He gives us all of the apparatus we need to perform these yogas and also to convey them to others. Whereas in an Orthodox Hindu family, many children are ashamed because the parents are not Vedantas. They're raised in an Orthodox Hindu tradition. They love the ritual, but they can't explain why the ritual is important. They don't understand the meaning behind it.
You think if the parents were to be in a position to give the true and convincing explanation for every ritual, the children would have definitely been otherwise?
Well, if the children could explain to their friends the monistic explanation that I gave you for our ritual, it would have been convincing, it would have been attractive, it would have fit into the culture, the Judeo-Christian culture here.
Okay.
Because worshipping a lot of gods and goddesses to a Jew who does not have any icons is repulsive. To a Christian, it is mind-boggling. But if you can explain that there are various aspects of God and they're all windows to the ultimate reality, and if God is infinite, so are his or her forms, that appeals to the Western mind.
Beautiful.
That appealed to me.
Yes.
And I understand the problem because in the wonderful magazine Hinduism Today, that has been explored. And parents who come to me late in the game, who've not come to our center, but they hear that I'm the spiritual leader here, they bring their daughters or their sons who are in college and they have rebelled against their family. Spirituality wasn't taught at home. Their parents didn't teach. And their children are caught up in Western culture and there's no communication. There was very little religion in the family because the parents were too busy making money.
Which has followed every other aspect of a meaningful life.
Yeah, and one in particular, the parents were mind-boggling. And if you look at the happiness studies that have come out of Harvard, a child is happy when it is grounded in a spiritual culture. That is understandable. And so in our Sunday schools, the one we started just on October 1st, I insisted that the children be allowed to come into the shrine, light the candles, wave the incense, and offer their flowers. That they have the direct experience of the atmosphere and participation. And that if they have prayers that they want to share, that they share. And then they can learn their chants, their bhajans, and hear the stories of Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, and Mother, but also to learn about the other religious traditions of the world. So they won't grow up afraid of the other. That they will be able to move with people of all backgrounds.
Yes, yes. Good. So nice to hear, Mataji. According to you, what India should learn from America and vice versa at this present juncture, at a time when we are passing through some sort of a cultural intermingling?
Right now, India is changing very rapidly. And many of our swamis are experiencing the frozen India syndrome, where they expect India to be like it was when they grew up. It's not. The village life is slowly dwindling, and yes, there are tribal areas, yes there are, but the extended family is changing to a nuclear family. There's a lot of education, so there's a lot of job opportunities, or there's a lot of opportunities for wealth. So India is experiencing that. And I think that is a natural cycle. India has to experience a growth in prosperity. And they come here, they send money back to India to help their parents. And many organizations in this country where Indians have come and become American citizens, they are founding organizations in India where children are becoming educated. So they will excel, they will succeed, they will get food on the table, they will get a good job, and they will make money, and then they will be able to become spiritual. But they have to go through the cycle of material prosperity.
That's fine. But what about America having anything to do with India in the form of any education? Is there anything that America should look at India to learn?
Oh yes. Well, look at me. What I've learned. When I go to India, and especially when I go alone, there's a rhythm of life. Now, it's not always practical, and but there is a web of life that's very tangible in India, a way of a non-linear web of life that changes your perspective. There's a feeling of interconnectivity that is just there when you go down a street and you start mixing. And people ask me, why would you want to go to Bellarmine during Durga Puja? I said, you know, this is India. You mix with the crowds, the Red Sea parts, but you are part of the throng, and you melt into it and you feel what it is. There's a feeling that comes from India. There's a tangible spirituality of the land itself. Not every Indian is spiritual. There's a huge problem of corruption in India. But the land has gone through such a spiritual eons of spirituality has passed over that land that one feels when one gets off the airplane and is touching the dust of the land. It's a tangible presence in the land itself. And even before you come into the presence of some of those old temples, you feel this thunderous atmosphere. Where do you find that? Where do you find that? In any other country? This incredible, palpable spiritual atmosphere. Where do you find a mountain range where you feel the darshan just entering your heart? Where do you find that? In the Himalayas? In the Nilgiri Hills? Where you know these sanctuaries have harvested seers. You know these mountains have been worshipped. The land, it takes your breath away. It's just an amazing experience. My very first trip, I remember landing in 1979, and it was like a theater in the round. You know, I'm used to freeways going in one direction. Landing in Kolkata in the dead of night, in a Bellarmont car where they don't turn on the headlights. I mean, who would have thought? And somehow managing these roads and these beautiful blossoms coming up in the middle of the road, women in their saris, splashes of color, and everything going on right in front of your eyes. And when I was reading the Gospel of Ramakrishna when I first joined, I had so many questions in my mind. How could Ramakrishna behave like this? How could such and such happen? And then going into the village of Kamapakor and Jarambati and seeing the utter, breathtaking simplicity of village life, it was an experience that absolutely blew me away. I'd never in my life seen such guilelessness. Then I understood Sri Ramakrishna's antics, how he behaved with the direct disciples. When I see these little children naked, just standing, looking at me, and everybody just stopping and staring at me because they hadn't seen white skin. In those days, it was very, very rare. And just this unabashed curiosity and the villagers taking me into their mud houses, showing me how they lived, sharing tea with me, worshiping me as a goddess, as their guest. I'd never experienced that in my life. What other country? I mean, there are other countries, yes, but that was my experience in India. It absolutely transformed my life. And coming back to America, I was terrified to go onto the freeway for 6 months. My whole cycle of time had changed. I couldn't drive